I wouldn't doubt with the trillions of currency units that are being created by the U.S. government and other governments around the world, I don't doubt that within the next year or two we'll see $100 silver. Maybe as outrageous as this is to say $200 silver.
This is Dunagun Kaiser, founder of Liberty and Finance. I'm now a licensed gold and silver broker for Miles Franklin. Call me directly for the physical gold and silver that you need at the best price with personalized private service from one of the oldest and best companies in the business. For fastest service, just call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 888-81-LIBERTY. And either I or one of my sons and fellow brokers will call you back as soon as we can and understand your needs. Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a returning guest whom we're always delighted to see. His name is Doug Casey. He's a legendary speculator. He's the author of many book series that are national bestsellers. Doug, thanks for joining us again here on Liberty and Finance.
Well, it's nice to be back, Dunagun.
We are doing this interview on Monday, June 21st, 2021. It's about a month ahead of the Natural Resources Symposium hosted by Rick Rule and Rule Investment Media. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But first, we wanted to throw you some questions that have been submitted by our viewers ahead of your arrival here. You've been with us several times in the past. You've talked to people about the importance of becoming more independent of your jurisdiction because rules can change and that can dramatically impact and impair your freedom, your liberty, your financial fortunes, that sort of thing. We definitely want to talk about that. So if we could start off with that, and people are concerned. Over the past year, we've seen restrictions placed on people's freedom of movement. So even if they had relocated or are considering relocated or trying to relocate, there's been restrictions on where people can go, quarantines if they do go, that kind of thing. Can you bring us up to your latest big picture thinking in terms of the importance of being an international man, as you've been called and as you've termed it, and how you see that landscape shifting currently?
Well, I've said for many years that as dangerous as the financial markets are and as risky as the economy is to your wealth, they're not nearly as risky as the political situation. So you have to diversify politically, not just financially, not just stocks and bonds and golds, but going in between two or more countries. Frankly, you just don't know what the next Russia in 1917 is going to be, or the next Germany in 1933, or the next China in 1948, or Cuba in 1959. And unfortunately, the U.S. has been going in the wrong direction for a long time. And I don't hesitate to say, and this is a radical statement, but we actually have genuine Bolsheviks in Washington, D.C. now. I mean, these people have absolutely horrible statist and collectivist ideas. They're cut from the same cloth as the Jacobins were in France in 1789. So, you should have already been diversified because, as you just said, Dunagun, it's very hard now with lockdowns all over the world. Your choices are actually quite limited at this point. So, it's still not too late. So act now and beat the absolute last-minute rush to diversify your money out of the country and diversify yourself if you can. I understand most people aren't in a position to buy a second or third home abroad, but if you are, and you should be, but if you are, you should do it.
Some people who've talked about relocation emphasize for people that rather than having a big, grandiose, expensive plan, there can be more budget-oriented plans. We've even heard the term go cheap, go small, go now. What's your philosophy about that? I think you just brushed on that a moment ago, but can you give some examples of things people can do to dramatically open up the possibilities of what may be within reach when they think they're completely out of reach, if this is just for the very elite?
Well, it depends on how much money you have, unquestionably. For an American to go to Canada, that's kind of jumping out of the fire and into the frying pan. Maybe a step in the right direction, maybe not. On the other hand, Mexico, which used to be a horrible choice from many points of view, is turning out to be a pretty good one because all of these countries change. In Latin America, anything can happen on any election. They can go from one extreme to the other, and they do regularly. Because I've spent a lot of time in Latin America and the Caribbean, visited every single country in both of those places. I'm reasonably familiar with them, but I've been to about 155 countries around the world and lived in a dozen, bought real estate in almost that many. So to answer your question, it's possible for an American to open up a foreign bank account or a foreign brokerage account. It used to be easy. Now it's hard, but it's still possible. Why? They don't want American business. It puts them under the thumb of various financial regulators. But if you can, open up a foreign bank or brokerage account, but unfortunately, that excludes a lot of small people who aren't worth the trouble of foreign banks. You should also, if possible, get a foreign residence permanent in some countries so that if you decide that you want to leave the U.S. or Canada, there's a place that will take you, not just as a tourist, which is sometimes very iffy, but as a permanent resident. So that's another thing that you want to do. Well, I don't know. That's all I can say. From there, it's just a question of how much money that you've got to allocate.
When people do relocate, say from the U.S. to one of these other countries, how safe have you experienced it be? Or are there specific guidelines or tips to make it as safe as it can be to move their fortunes with them? Or do you recommend they leave them where they are or put them elsewhere when they're relocating to a new country?
Well, look, once again, anything can happen anywhere. Unfortunately, the U.S. is not the country it used to be. It used to be that anybody in the world would want to get money to the U.S. It was safe. The rule of law was observed. Regulations were not onerous. That's changed. Rephrase the question, if you would, Dunagun. I mean,
when you're moving out of the U.S. and moving to a different jurisdiction, for example, I remember we were on vacation. We were in the Caribbean snorkeling. I believe it was Belize. While we were on the little tiny boat that takes you from your cruise ship to your snorkeling location, they were handing out these brochures to us. Move to Belize. It was from like the Belize Department of whatever, tourism or immigration, whatever. And they were pitching to U.S. citizens, if you come here, as long as you either bring like 42 grand or 200 grand with you maybe, or if you can prove that you have an annual income from outside of our country of at least 32 grand a year or something like that, we are more than welcome to come and you don't have to pay any fees or anything to come and move and live in Belize. The question is, people wonder, should they leave their money behind in a U.S. bank? Should they take it with them? Is it safe?
Look, there's something called the multi-flag principle. You have your citizenship in one country. You have your residence in another. You do your banking in a third. You have your business in a fourth. And preferably, you have more than two citizenships, more than two residences. And nothing wrong with Belize, delightful little country, low costs. Panama is another one where you can arrange for a permanent residency with an investment in the country. Choose your investment wisely. As little as $20,000, but they're raising it to $200,000 in a couple of months. So things are always changing. But which country should you go to? I mean, look, we can talk about all the 15 countries in South America. We can talk about the countries in Latin America, countries in the Caribbean, but they're all individual. So it's hard to generalize other than to say they're all different and they're all getting tougher and the fuse is getting shorter. So whatever you're going to do, and you should do something, do it now.
As part of that doing it now, I guess the nut I was trying to get to was if somebody's moving their person and their household to a different location, are there any tips or tricks from you on when people are they want to take their wealth with them? Is there a safer way to do that, or is it safer just to leave it somewhere else? You say have it under a different flag.
Right. Well, it may not be possible to take your wealth out of the U.S. in the future. If we have a serious dollar crisis, a serious monetary crisis, and we will, the U.S., especially with the current regime in Washington, well, it wouldn't matter even if Trump was in office. He's quite capable of doing this type of thing, too. They'll tell you, no, you can't take your money out of the country. And of course, even if you do, many of your fellow Americans will see that as being unpatriotic, as not showing faith in your country and so forth. So once again, it gets back to plan ahead and do it now while it's still possible. Because I promise you, it may not be possible in the future. Look, the first time I ever encountered this personally was when I was in England a long time ago in 1966. And I remember when I was taking the packet across to France, an officer, I was just a kid at the time, just a teenager, and he asked me, do you have more than 50 pounds with you? And I said, no, because I didn't. But you couldn't take more than 50 British pounds out of the country with you at that time. So this can happen anytime, anywhere. It's happened in lots and lots of countries. And it's going to happen in the U.S. at some point.
It's interesting that the urgency of your discussion is somewhat different. You've always said it's a good idea, but I hear a very additional message layered in there. We just interviewed and just released last week with James Rawls from survivalblog.com, and he said, folks, the window of opportunity, you can still relocate. He's talking about within the U.S., for example, but he really sees that your chances after this summer, for example, are going to be much more constrained. If you're going to do it promptly. It's quite interesting. You also mentioned in passing things that made the U.S. A unique magnet for people in the past seeking the rule of law, and that's changing. We have a question here from Pa Bar who says, please ask Doug. He remembers Doug mentioning that we, America, the USA, are no longer unique as a country, while we have traveled a great distance in such a short amount of time, coming from a small rebellious confederation to a global empire. What made us unique, and what can America do to become special again? Well,
the U.S. really was unique. And I'm not a nationalist, I'm not a jingoist, but the fact of the matter is that the U.S. really was unique. It's the only country in world history that was actually founded. Its basic principle was the rights of the individual, personal freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of press, founding principles. They were enshrined. Well, they're being washed away at this point. So, I really feel bad about it, because when the U.S. is gone, there's no other country you can go to, quite frankly.
So do you think there's anything that ordinary people can exhort or force by whatever means to change so that our country becomes as desirable as it should be or as it could be in those regards?
No, I'd say forget about it, because they talk about the U.S. as being a democracy. But what does that mean? It means that you get to vote for Tweedledee or Tweedledum on your election every 2 or 4 years. And generally your choice is between an active socialist or even Marxist on the Democrat side and somebody on the Republican side that says, no, these Democrats are going too far, too fast. And that's your choice. It's a horrible choice. Getting involved politically, we're way past that, the time for that to be effective.
There's a question here about the coming economic turmoil or cliff or collapse that many people are concerned about, that they feel is a imminent risk to their family's financial well-being going forward. Vincent Murphy said he's been reading your books, and he says, two questions. One is, with commodity prices running hot but just starting to cool off, why is it that silver has only hit about half of its all-time high?
Okay, silver. I mean, this is like an icon for a lot of people. it's like a cross of silver will ward off the government vampire. Look, I'm a big fan of silver from the point of view of fundamentals, from the point of view of market psychology. My view on silver is that we're likely to have a speculative bubble in silver as well as in gold and gold stocks. The Robinhood people, and there's 20 million of them that are looking for a way to double their money overnight, they're eventually going to migrate into commodities with a good story. And silver's got an excellent story. And silver stocks have an even better story than silver. And I've personally been involved in the past in a number of stocks that have gone 100 to 1, I'm not kidding, and not over the course of a lifetime like Berkshire Hathaway, but in the course of a market cycle, 3 or 4 years. I've even owned a stock that went 1,000 to 1. That happened to have been Diamond Fields. So, yeah, you're going to find the public getting involved in silver and gold and all these stocks. It's going to happen, and you ought to be positioned in them now. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll never happen. I doubt it, though.
So he was asking also, do you have any suggestion of why silver is such a standout as being a laggard among all other commodities over the past several decades?
Well, it's a small market to start with. It's number one, it's a small market in world terms. Number two, all the gold that's ever been mined since the dawn of history, and I'll guess 6 billion ounces, that's a reasonable number, is still above ground somewhere. It's accessible. There's about 800, 900 million ounces of silver mined every year, but there's not a lot of it that's sitting there in a pile the way it is like for gold. So that because of the lack of above ground inventory, it's very volatile. Other favorable things for silver is that it's a high-tech metal. You've got to remember it's the most reflective and the most conductive of all metals. So there are more and more uses found for it every day. I don't think you can go wrong with silver. And at $25, it's not like at giveaway levels, but it's still pretty cheap right now. And it'll have its day in the sun. I wouldn't doubt that in the next few years we've seen $50 silver a couple times in the past. I wouldn't doubt with the trillions of currency units that are being created by the US government and other governments around the world, I don't doubt that within the next year or two we'll see $100 silver. Maybe as outrageous as this is to say $200 silver. At which point I might be looking to sell it and see what's cheap, what I can trade my silver for that's cheap. For all I know, maybe it'll be Berkshire Hathaway by then.
Well, that's a question now about a coming collapse, whether it's going to be sudden or gradual in the other things that seem to be in bubbles, which includes equities, bonds, and real estate. Vincent Murphy, same questioner, asks, what's your take on this forecast by 2024 of a big pullback in real estate and by 2027 or 28 heading into a worldwide depression?
Well, I've said for years that we're headed towards what I call the Greater Depression. And I call it the Greater Depression because it's going to be much worse and much longer lasting and much different than the unpleasantness of 1929 to 1946. In light of that, what should you do? Especially since all over the world, all the countries of the world, freedom is retrogressing. I mean, a perfect indication of this is the COVID hysteria. And I say hysteria because, to me, it seems like just a nasty flu that's been promoted into the proportions of the Black Plague. Well, I don't know if I answered the question or not, Dunagun.
The question again, you mentioned about a coming pullback in in our economic lives it sounds like you do still see? What are some of the main elements you're seeing for this Greater Depression that people should be watching for?
Look, here's the problem. It's that since interest rates last peaked in the early 1980s, when you'll recall, the U.S. government was paying in between 15 and 18% for money. Now it's paying 1-2%, close to zero actually at this point. Interest rates are negative in real terms. So we've had 40 years of interest rates that have been going down, and it's no coincidence the last 40 years has been the stock market going up. These things are cyclical, and the stock market is greatly overpriced. Whether you look at price to dividends ratio, I mean, in those days, you could get 15% on utilities dividends, and the dividends were going up. Price to earnings ratio. I mean, in those days, you could get 6 or 7 times earnings on lots of stocks, quality stocks. Now, there's stocks out there, most stocks don't even have earnings, believe it or not. But the S&P's price earnings ratio is something on the order of 35 to 40. I mean, it's just grossly overpriced. So I don't want to be in stocks right now. Absolutely don't want to be in bonds. Bonds are like they're a triple threat to your capital. You've got the inflation risk, you've got the interest rate risk, and you've got the default risk. So it's hard to find a place to put your money where you're not going to lose it and where you have a chance of making money. But during a depression, it's been said quite correctly that during a depression, everybody loses. The winner is just the person that loses the least. So the name of the game now is to make sure you keep what you have. Unfortunately, for most people, the best way to just keep what you have is to learn to be a speculator, to take advantage of the wild surges up and down that we're going to see in all markets now for the indefinite future, at least the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. I expect the current system to basically fall apart, and I don't know what will come after it.
You brought up speculation. We had another question answered by another viewer who noticed the title that I put in the call for questions where you're going to be on as titling you as the legendary speculator, Doug Casey. He says, legendary speculator. Is that what we're all becoming now if we are buying precious metals? So do you believe that people who are now jumping on and buying precious metals at the current levels are being speculators?
Yes, and we have to define the word speculator. A speculator is somebody that allocates money to capitalize on distortions in the marketplace, usually government-caused distortions. That's different from an investor. An investor is somebody that allocates money to create more wealth. An investor is planting a seed, hoping to get near a corn that gives him 100 seeds. That's not what a speculator does. If we lived in a free market society where government wasn't intervening constantly in all ways, speculators would be out of business. They would be unnecessary. There wouldn't be distortions for them to capitalize on. So the answer to the question is yes, you're going to be forced to be a speculator in the years to come, just as people in Germany in the 1920s were forced to be a speculator just to keep what they had if they were lucky.
Now, this is related. I want to tie this back around in a circle here for you, because you've just been talking about these unprecedented amount of government interventions. Governments often cause these distortions, but that's ironically, that's a conundrum, because Vincent also says, Doug, I know I cannot predict anything with this nutty Fed policy, and do you think capitalism died on September 28th? So the question there is, if these environments are so distorted, where your wise speculator jumps in because he thinks that there'll be a reversion to the mean or nature will take its course or whatever, but in a world where it's so distorted and where there's such powerful and deep pockets committed to maintaining that distortion, isn't it possible that will just persist and become even more distorted? There's no longer a hope, is there, on the part of a speculator that somehow nature is going to reassert itself? We're going to revert back to away from that distortion.
You're absolutely correct. And there have been a lot of recent examples showing how hard it can be to be a successful speculator. For instance, a few months ago, the price of oil on the futures exchanges went to minus $30 a barrel. How is that possible for oil to be at minus $30 a barrel? But it happened. More recently, this movie group, is it called AMC? I wasn't involved in it. I'm still not. A bankrupt movie group got in the sights of the Robin Hood guys, and they took it from a couple dollars up to $250, a totally bankrupt company. I mean, there's going to be things like that going on all the time. It's not going to be easy to pick the right horse to ride in crazy times like these. But an ideal speculation, if you can find it, and you don't find them every day, is to do something like buy gold when it was $35 an ounce. Well, I bought it shortly after that. I've been buying gold since then, 50 years. God, it's a long time. And I've never sold an ounce, okay? It was a great speculation to ride it from $35 to $17.50 and going higher. And there will be other things like that in the future. Commodities, stocks.
Piggybacking off of what you just said about you writing this for decades is another question from another viewer who asks you, if you've been predicting this major setback for like 30 years or so, and if it hasn't happened yet the way you've been talking about this Greater Depression, how long can a person be right in principle but wrong in seeing the timeline, and not just at some point it becomes the same as being wrong? Because anybody who's basically positioned themselves in advance of such an event and they're getting older thinks, well, I've been wrong this whole time. I think there's a lot of people feeling that way over the past decade with metals. But how do you think about that in the case of seeing a collapse that hasn't happened yet for such a long time?
Well, when I talk about economics, I view economics as a division of philosophy. Most of the people that are called economists today view it as a subdivision of mathematics with all kinds of formulas and advanced. That's all nonsense. So the fact that I've been predicting a Greater Depression for many years, I still predict it because it's you can see the way the world is going, you can see the way the economy is going, the way the political situation is going, and it's predictable. Yeah, a Greater Depression is in the cards. But one of the first rules of predicting anything is if you're going to predict an event, don't also predict the time, because anything can happen. For instance, it looked like things were going to collapse back in the early 80s when interest rates were at 15 and 20%. They could have, they should have. And if they would have, if they had, we'd be in a much better position today because all the distortions up to that time would have been wiped out. If you predicted a collapse back in 2008 with the real estate bubble, who would have guessed that the U.S. government would take interest rates down to close to zero to keep the collapse from happening? And in addition, print money by the trillions to make it possible for debtors to pay their debts instead of being wiped out and wiser allocators of capital getting their assets. So what can they do at this point? Well, they might be able to do something. But look, I do see a continually dropping standard of living for the average guy. And the definition of a depression, the best definition, is it's a period of time when the average person's standard of living drops significantly. And I think that's really been the case for the last 50 years since the devaluation of the dollar for the average guy. In real terms, he's earning the same or less, but he's head over heels in debt today, which he wasn't back then. And the government is bankrupt today, which it really wasn't back then. So, no, I'm quite correct in predicting a depression. People expect when you predict a depression that we're going to have something like an instant replay of what happened in 1929. Well, I've never said that, and nor do I say that today, although it's a possibility. So what I'm trying to do is educate people in the way I think the world works. That's what the study of economics is about. Okay, it's not about making exact predictions on July 15th, 2028, this is going to happen. That's crazy. Nobody can do that. It's insane to try.
Quick approaching is the 2021 Natural Resource Symposium in, it used to be hosted in Vancouver. It was named the Sprott prior. Now it's hosted by Rick Rule of Rule Investment Media. You're one of the keynote speakers on the splash screen. We'll make sure that everybody sees that and gets a chance to enroll for that. If they do attend the Natural Resource Symposium, could you explain to them why you think it's valuable enough to spend your time there? Why are natural resources important to people now? Why should they be paying attention? And what are they likely to hear thematically, at least from you at the symposium, or to benefit from attending such a symposium?
Okay. Well, I've always been a specialist in natural resources. Why? On the one hand, they're the raw materials of civilization itself. So it's a good thing to know about them. Another reason, more appropriate to this conference, I think, is that they're the most volatile set of stocks in the world. Resource stocks are more volatile than internet stocks. I mean, they go up and down by thousands of percent. And from my point of view, I like them because a dollar properly positioned in resources can do the work of $10 or $100 positioned in the Dow Jones. So that's why you want to be there. But especially now, because they fluctuate, as I said, they always have and they always will fluctuate dramatically up and down. Right now, as we speak, we're close to a bottom. This is one of those times. They happen once or twice in a decade when you can jump in to almost anything. That's not a fraud. And of course, more than any other area, resource stocks are full of frauds. That's another question entirely. A reason why you got to learn about them. But I think now's the time you can get in, and your odds of making money are extremely high at this moment. That's why you should go to the conference, because there are a lot of speakers there that have a lot of knowledge, and you should be listening to them.
And I want to let people know that the link to the banner will be in the description of this video. There's a link there. If you use that link to subscribe to the conference, folks, we also benefit from it on our channel here. Helps us to keep people like Doug Casey coming your way. And Doug, people will get the chance to hear you as one of the keynote speakers there, as well as several others, in addition to Rick Rule, of course. And we're just grateful for you being here, giving us a taste of why it's important, why natural resources are in your sights and targets as a speculator, and why that's important to people going forward. Doug Casey, author of a series of books, the best-selling author and legendary speculator. Thank you for joining us here again on Liberty and Finance.
It's a pleasure, Dunagun. Thank you.
This is Dunagun Kaiser, founder of Liberty and Finance. I'm now a licensed gold and silver broker for Miles Franklin. Call me directly for the physical gold and silver that you need at the best price with personalized private service from one of the oldest and best companies in the business. 31 years strong, A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, 0 complaints, licensed and bonded. For physical delivery, vault storage, or precious metals IRAs, excellent prices, privacy, and confidentiality. Pay by check, money order, ACH, bank wire, or Bitcoin. Satisfaction guaranteed. For fastest service, just call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 888-81-LIBERTY. And either I or one of my sons and fellow brokers will call you back as soon as we can and understand your needs.